Hey guys, this week I want to talk about enjoying the wrath of God. That's right, the wrath of God is something to be enjoyed. It is a beautiful attribute of His character that grace-oriented people sometimes want to erase or ignore, but only because they don't rightly understand it. It's imperative that we don't hastily write off scriptural truths that we're uncomfortable with, but rather find their proper synchronization in the person of Jesus. If you ever have trouble reconciling something about the nature of God, look to Jesus. Doesn't look like Him? It's not God. There's no dark side of God hiding behind Jesus' back. He is the perfect, visible image of the invisible God. Now, when we look at this word for wrath, that word is orge. It's actually the same where we get the words orgy and orgasm. So it's already a fun word. It carries with it a sense of intense passion. Now, this is an important starting point because we have to acknowledge God is love. And He is love in all of His aspects, not just some of His aspects. Some would think that to focus too much on the love of God is to water down the wrath of God. They're afraid you're going to embrace an Oprah God or a Joel Osteen God. Now, I am not writing off the wrath of God. In fact, I believe His wrath is far hotter than you could possibly imagine. But you better be careful in your twisted perceptions that you don't think that wrath has to be highlighted in a way that it waters down the love of God. God's wrath is not some separate schizophrenic side of His personality. He doesn't love on some days and hate on other days. If God just loved as an action, then perhaps He can hate as an action. But God doesn't love, He is love. All He is capable of is love. So we see His wrath is actually a hot extension of His love. All He is fiery love. His wrath is a big fat no to sin and ungodliness because of what sin does to damage and abuse and molest His children. See, His wrath is not against you. His wrath is positively for you. His wrath has never been about His own moody narcissism, as if He was just personally peeved at dirty sinners because of what they did to Him. His wrath is hot, intense, passionate, zealous love for His people. C.S. Lewis said this. He said, "The fires of heaven and hell are both lit up with the same flame. It is the fire of His love." You're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. You see, millions of Orthodox believers have for centuries believed that even heaven and hell are merely our words for what it's like to be in the presence of God. It's going to be pure bliss or pure torture depending on how you're coming to the situation. And you see, we all ultimately go to the same place, they say, into God's presence. And you see, that love is meant to be drunk down and enjoyed. If you swim against the stream, then what's meant for your good actually hurts you. It's like your house is being powered by electricity, and that's an amazing thing. But when you wrongly come against what's meant for your good and stick your finger hard-headedly into the socket, you're going to get a terrible shock. We have to get out of this mentality that God's wrath is about punishment. Even the word for punishment in the Greek is the word pruning. You see, God's wrath is actually for us. It's a horticultural word. It's to grow. It's like a father's discipline. It's not retributive, like I'm going to get you, sucker. It's rehabilitating. Now, in saying that, I'm not preaching purgatory, that hell is about cleaning you up and fixing you up. But you see, even His judgments are all positively for you, to safeguard you and to prevent you from self-destruction. God's wrath against sin is very real. But it's because He loves us and hates sinfulness. And there is an ecstatic lens of joy that we begin to get when we realize the recovery of love in this entire topic of wrath. Now, we know John 3:36 says, "Whoever rejects the Son, the wrath of God remains on them." What does something like that mean? It's because these people who are rejecting the Son and rejecting the only package that salvation comes in, They are demanding to own and identify with the very self-destructing sinfulness that a loving Father hates. They're demanding to own a wrath that He's already dealt with, and they're demanding their own self-destruction. When we rightly understand God's wrath, we go into ecstasy. It's one of the most brilliant and selfless attributes of His nature. We must understand the apostolic passages on wrath. We don't abandon this important aspect of His nature just because of man's twisted perceptions that have been projected onto him, making him seem angry and abusive. Let's look at what Paul writes about God's wrath in the New Testament. Romans chapter 1, verse 18 is the first use of the word wrath that Paul has in Romans, and he deals with God's wrath throughout this book in various ways. He says that the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. And then he rattles off a long list of shameful lust and depravities. But you have to understand here, what he's doing, he's associating God's wrath with sinful desires and practices themselves. I'll go on to read here. Verse 19. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power, divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Although they knew God, they neither glorified God or gave thanks to Him, but their thinking became futile, their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. They exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man, birds, animals, reptiles. Therefore God gave them over to the sinful desires of their hearts, to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, whosoever praised. Amen. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lust. Even women exchanged their natural relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed indecent acts with other men, received in themselves the due penalty of their perversion. Furthermore, since they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, He gave them over to a depraved mind to do what ought not to be done. They become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, depravity, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They're gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, boastful, invented ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They're senseless, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Although they know God's righteous decree, those who do such things deserve death, they only continue to do these very things. Not only that, but they approve those who practice them. Now that is a mouthful of fun passage right there, right? That's not normally your Easter Sunday morning cheer everybody up reading. But here's what we got to realize. The wrath of God is not against people. It's against the godlessness of those people. It's against these evil desires and these wicked pronings of man's heart in Adam, that the very things that are destroying these people. His wrath is not against sinners, it's against their disease. And His wrath is hot because He loves humanity and He doesn't want us destroyed by these things. So Paul articulates these sinful things because wrath itself is attached to these things. You see, the wrath of God is nothing less than the objective, built-in consequences of sin itself, to which He hands all men over to, in part, so that He may ultimately show mercy to all. Wrath is never an end in of itself, but it's a precursor to redemption and greater glory. Wrath points left-handedly to our ultimate transcendence above it all. Now notice, Paul says these sinners suppress the truth in unrighteousness. The truth is already within them, or else they wouldn't be able to suppress it. In the same way, he says in verse 19, because that which is known about God is evident within them. Where? Within them. God made it evident. Everybody deep down knows the truth. Even unbelievers, even, the atheists, the demons know the truth and they shudder deep down within. There's this intrinsic God-given knowledge in us. Now we can reject or suppress the truth of His love for us, and how we respond to that truth, How we respond to that love dictates whether this fire of His presence is manifesting as wrath or good pleasure. But it's the same fire. You're resisting the flame of love, swimming upstream against it. You're not built to function that way. It destroys you. Like you're going against a current that's meant to bless you. But the voltage works against you when you work against it. See, these evil desires and actions have built in within them a built-in destruction within themselves. That's what the wrath of God is. We need to redefine this. And even there, you got to see it as corrective and retributive, okay? Not retributive, but corrective. By wrath, do we mean God hates sinners? No, that's this Calvinistic view. Here in Romans 1, Paul's explicit about how bad they are. And then in verse 24, therefore God gave them over to sinful desires, to the hearts prone to sexual impurity, all this stuff. All in all, He let them do what they wanted. And that is what the wrath of God is. Sin destroys. The wages of sin is still death. Essentially, God hands them over. You want to go there? Fine. To what? Hands them over to themselves, sin with its own inherent consequences. There's judgment in the action itself. You stick your hand in a meat grinder, it'll hurt. See, God wasn't prohibiting these things because they were fun. He prohibited these things because they're deadly. It's like a kid who demands over and over to touch the hot pot on the stove, and eventually, after innumerable attempts, the parent says, fine, you want to destroy yourself? Look, you're going to find out. You're going to get burned. Do what you want. You'll see the consequences. C.S. Lewis said there's two types of people. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those who God finally says, okay, your will be done. He's not going to force your happiness, but He will allow you to see the frustration of resisting it. Wrath is nothing more than God letting you do what you want in your own hard-headed stubbornness and receiving the consequences of those actions themselves. And even this is an act of love. It's a fine, go that direction, see what the end result is. Paul says, up to now in the past, that's what God was doing. In former days, God just let you Gentiles do what you want. And look at the result, idolatry. He's handed them all over to that stuff. And that is what wrath is. But now He's showing us something better called the gospel. There's better news to this whole thing. Right now we have a better result. We see the end of the matter. Paul ultimately builds his argument up to Romans chapter 11, where he says God has handed all men over to disobedience so that He could have mercy on all. He essentially let us go our own way. But it was always a grand setup so He could reveal His great mercy to every last one of us. He even accelerated it. He blinded. He hardened. He accelerated the nastiness that we wanted by showing us the intense consequences. But ultimately, even that was a hidden yes in disguise. It was to show us the Father's heart. Romans 5:9, since therefore we have now been justified by His blood, much more we shall be saved by Him from the wrath of God. And not just the wrath of like end times punishment or whatever, but even the wrath of like doing stupid things in this life and the built-in consequences. Wrath is not an end in of itself. It was always a means to an end to show us the futility of trying to run our own way and follow our own wisdom. It's trying to escape the loving existence of the family of the Trinity as if we had a better idea. Wrath is to a degree love expressed in protection. It's the 60 warriors surrounding Solomon's love carriage. It's the wall of fire. It's a hedge of protection around the beloved. It's even the protection of the party to the goats. He said, you guys never like my parties anyway, so go to the basement. You don't want to play. Look, don't ruin the party for everybody else. Love, play, joy, peace will ultimately not be violated. Hurled against all demonic intrusion to goodness, wrath protects us against the terror of the night. Wrath is ecstasy secure. Love you guys. Let's see you next week.
The Ecstatic Magazine is now available online for free. Visit thenewmystics.com to read and join our email news list to receive future issues. Connect, Drink Deep, our 3-day intensive schools are gatherings to plunge into the new creation realities of our mystical union with Christ. It's a marriage of paradigm-shifting grace theology with contemplative supernatural activation and impartation. Our upcoming schedule is limited, so find a location nearest you. Our only East Coast event for the year will be in New Jersey, September 12th through 14th. Our only Midwest event for the year will be in St. Louis, October 17th through 19th. All of our Ireland and UK friends should join us in Dublin, November 7th through 9th. My only event in Australia for the entire year will be in Brisbane, December 5th through 7th. This one's already packing out, so please register early. Our next Texas Mystical School will be in Houston, January 2015. I'll be in Basel, Switzerland for a school fully translated into German, February 2015. In March 2015, we'll be in Las Vegas. In April, you can join us in Fort Collins, Colorado. And now is the time to register to join myself and Dave Vaughn on our Ladyboy Love mission to the transvestites of Bangkok, Thailand. This one will be wild. This trip is in November, but applications are due with deposit this summer, so visit us online right away. And for a mission closer to home, we'll visit Mexico next spring, ministering to thousands from around the country. This is our most affordable mission trip ever, so sign up early to ensure your spot.
Place on earth with you.